Good day everyone, my name is Ramos and this is my answer. So for number 1, features of open loop control, it is often associated with ballistic skills. It doesn't produce any feedback. It cannot be altered if an unpredictable change arises. It is regarded as level 1 control and its elements are the input, process, and output. Let's put it in its simplest way. The difference of the two is when we say open loop control, it is a system of subconscious control that does not use or reference to feedback, while closed loop control is a system that adjusts itself to varying conditions by feeding output information back as an input. Input is the empty soft drink can. Process is when you toss it to the trash can, and the output will be a soft drink can inside the recycling bin or maybe outside of it if you fail to make it shoot. But it won't come back to you because there's no feedback in an open loop system. To put it another way, it just means that once the performer has begun performing the skill, there is nothing they can do to adjust it because the movement is being created or it is unavoidable. Motor programs are initiated, for example, by the neocortex and are maintained by positive feedback loop of the interpositus nucleus. Sensory inputs, which can also be copies of output signals, are provided to cerebral cortex neurons. That was according to the neural systems for robotics. I have here 3 lines of evidences that provide support for the notion of motor programs. First, feedback processing is slow, so that at least rapid movements will be completed before the feedback can be returned to the stages of processing and correction determined and initiated. Second, movements appear to be planned in advance, as evidenced by the fact that art is increased with movement complexity, suggesting that a response programming stage requires more time to plan as complexity increases. Third, differentiation studies. The differentiation studies showed that movement is possible, although degraded somewhat depending on the type of behavior, in the absence of feedback from the moving limb, implying that some central mechanism was at least partly responsible for movement organization and control. Neurons in the brain's premotor cortex are active during the planning period that occurs the fraction of a second before a person or other primate initiates a movement. Those neurons do not directly receive sensory input nor do they directly stimulate movement of the body. Instead, Soboda says their activity represents a cognitive phenomenon. You can actually read out from the neurons what the animal will do in the future, he says. In humans, you can record this activity in EEG electrode and read out in coarse terms when how a person will move before he or she is aware of where they will move. With novel movements, you're engaging the patient's nervous system to break stereotypical patterns so that physical therapies can reorganize its responses in a more effective and albeit pain-free way. Yes, novel movements are movements that are slightly different from those we habitually use day to day. And often when we experience pain with a specific movement, our brains created a lasting association between the pain experience and movement of that limb or that area of the body. By using novel movements, we can explore ways of moving that are not painful, and by regular repetition and exploration of those movements start to decrease the pain associated with moving that area. So here's the video the showing the novel movements that can be applied for a professional golf player and a shuffleboard player or in a wheelchair basketball player. So we cannot just suggest any activity or any exercise that could show a novel movement. And we can say that it's just a novel movement because physical therapies has some proper way of doing the novel movement. So here is the example of it.
Hello, my name is Corey Blickenstaff. I'm a physical therapist in Vancouver, Washington. I'd like to show you a group of arm exercises or arm movements that I've come up with and found to be helpful. So we're going to go through a series of positions. First position is going to be elbow straight, palm facing downward. Okay, and the first movement you're going to do is you're going to extend your wrist while you extend your fingers. And what you're trying to accomplish here is extending your fingers while not allowing your palm to do its automatic movement of going forward. That's what it's naturally going to want to do. You're trying to limit that from happening. Okay, next one is palm down, wrist curled, fingers curled. Now this time as you curl your fingers, there's going to be a tendency for your hand to want to pop up and down, and you're trying to limit that. Now the reason this is helpful is for a couple of reasons. For one, it introduces a novel movement. This is not a movement that most people's bodies do naturally. It's normal for your hand to pop up. That's not a bad thing, it's normal. But by limiting it, we create a situation where this is a novel movement. Next is elbow straight, palm up, wrist extended, and extending your fingers without letting your palm go forward. Novel movements are important, especially in painful situations, because they provide a window of opportunity for our body to form a new opinion about a movement, hopefully an opinion that is not a painful one. Okay, now elbow straight, palm up, curl the wrist, and then curl the fingers. Now you notice there how my elbow wants to flex a little bit. This is one of the movements that you're trying to control against. It'll be real common for people as they do this, have all kinds of movements going. So this is real control based. Okay, next is elbow bent, palm facing you. Extend the wrist, extend the fingers, still controlling the same thing with the palm. I keep my hand here to help me control it, but it's not really, I'm not holding it here, it's more for cueing. Now the other thing this does is, since this is not a typical movement that we usually do, is that it's a chance to increase our movement repertoire. Now palm facing you, elbow bent, wrist bent, curl the fingers. And I would argue that both introducing novel movements and increasing.
The idea of a generalized motor program is that a motor program for a particular class of actions is stored in memory, and that a unique pattern of activity will result whenever the program is executed. In order for the program to be executed, certain parameters must be supplied to the program that define how it is to be executed on that particular trial. Because the program's output in terms of movements of the limbs can be altered somewhat according to the parameters chosen on a particular trial, the program is said to be generalized. Before describing how a such system might operate, it will be helpful to consider an example of generalized program for a different application. The common example used to exemplify the notion of a GMP is writing one's signature. Each of us can write our signature under the variety of conditions according to generalized motor program perspective. We do this by specifying the movement parameters needed to meet the requirements at hand while maintaining the invariant features of the GMP. For example, if I were asked to write my name, Max Edward, very quickly on a sheet of paper, the signature maintains the relative timing characteristics invariant to GMP, but the specification of absolute timing would be reduced. This will result in me taking the same proportion of the total time to write the MAX, or the word max. For example, in my first name, when writing quickly as when writing under normal time constraints, but the absolute time used would be reduced. Similarly, if I were asked to write my name in a small box or in a sheet of paper or much larger like manila paper or in a cartolina paper or in a whiteboard, for example, in the classroom, the invariant features would not change, but the actual timing, the actual forces, and even the specific effectors used to produce the movement would change. In a smaller situation, one would use primarily finger movements to produce a signature, while in the larger situation, one may use shoulder and arm movements with minimal or no movements of the fingers. When asked to produce a movement sequence with the left hand after learning with the right hand, for example, transfer is not always very effective. Again, transfer is not always very effective. Thus, there do seem to be some limits to parameterizing a generalized motor program. So that's all. Thank you for listening.